In the first episode of Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, we see Jeff's neighbor, Glenda Cleveland, hearing strange noises from her neighbor's apartment. We see a white man washing blood off of a knife and off of his hands and then chugging a beer. We later see that that man is, of course, Jeffrey Dahmer. Who else? Glenda confronts him in the hallway and tells him that a foul smell is coming from his apartment, and he tells her that it's just some meat that went bad. Jeff goes to a gay bar called Club 219, where he offers to buy 3 black men drinks at the bar. Jeff offers to take photos of the men for $50. 2 of the men decline, but one of the men by the name of Tracy Edwards agrees. Jeff invites him back to his apartment, and as soon as Tracy enters, he notices the same smell that his neighbor did. Jeff slips drugs into his drink, and Tracy starts to feel uneasy. He tells him he wants to go, but Jeff tries to keep him there. Jeff handcuffs him, and things start to escalate. Jeff tackles him and then threatens him with a long knife. Glenda appears to overhear what's going on through her vents. Jeff then forces him to watch The Exorcist 3. Tracy tries to leave again, but Jeff forces him down, insisting that he's going to pay him, and that's when Tracy notices a blood stain on the mattress. Tracy tries to seduce him to calm him down and put him at ease, but Jeff catches on and once again threatens him with a knife. Jeff takes a few photos of him, and then they go back to his bedroom to continue watching the movie. Jeff begins listening to his heartbeat and tells him that he wants to hear it because
I'm gonna eat it.
And that's when Tracy manages to get free. He hits Jeff with multiple objects and escapes from the apartment. He flags down 2 cops in a car and tells them that a man tried to kill him. He brings them back to Jeff's apartment and they investigate the premises. They also notice the foul smell and also discover photographs of dead bodies. Jeff tries to run but is tackled by the police. As he is taken away, Tracy says,
"You get my motherfucker!"
as Glenda yells at the police for not listening to her before. Jeff's father, Lionel, gets called down to the station and is informed that his son was arrested for attempted murder. He tells them that Jeff was always a strange boy and that when he had a hernia operation at age 4, he was never the same. The detectives tell him of all the horrifying things they found in his apartment, including body parts, bones, Polaroids of dead bodies, and a vat of acid. They also tell him that they believe Jeff ate some of his victims. They leave him to collect himself, and Lionel breaks down in tears. Glenda is told by a police officer that she and the other tenants will have to evacuate the apartment building. Glenda asks what they found in Jeff's apartment, and the episode ends. So, as an episode, I think the episode is pretty good. Despite whether or not it's totally based in fact, I think the episode does a good job of drawing in the viewer and keeping us engaged. I like how the episode focuses more on Tracy and the emotions he went through while in a very terrifying situation. I think ending the episode with Glenda asking what they found in the apartment as some kind of a cliffhanger was a bit strange, considering we already learned what they found a scene before this. I think if they just scrapped that scene with Lionel and the detectives and then ended it with Glenda asking what they found, it would have served as a much better cliffhanger. Something you'll notice while watching this show is the bonkers editing. The show is edited so poorly that I'm pretty sure I got whiplash while binge watching it twice for this video. But this is really the only episode that felt structured. And it's all downhill from here. The second episode, titled Please Don't Go, is a perfect example of that bonkers editing I talked about earlier. We start off with Jeff being brought into jail, getting his mugshot taken and whatnot. He's questioned by the detectives on why he did what he did, and Jeff tells him that he's just going to tell them everything. And, well, you knew what was coming. It's time for a childhood flashback. Yay. We see young Jeff coming home to find his mother Joyce passed out on the bed from an apparent drug overdose or suicide attempt. His father comes home and declares that she's faking it. We see scenes of his parents constantly arguing with each other. We learn that Joyce appeared to have suffered from depression and anxiety and had an addiction to pills. His father also appears to berate her for this instead of helping her. We see Jeff doing weird stuff like gifting his teacher tadpoles. They emphasize how weird this is by showing 2 other kids giving the teacher an apple, a normal gift, because this show is subtle. We later see him and his dad picking up roadkill and dissecting it in the garage despite Joyce's protest against it. We then do a wicked time jump to 1981 where Jeff is in Florida after apparently getting kicked out of the army and then going to stay with his grandma. He gets a job as a butcher, and then we get a long, unnecessary segment of Jeff seeing a muscular mannequin at a men's clothing store and then hiding in the dressing room until closing time so he can steal it. We see him in bed caressing the mannequin as if it is a real person, as Please Don't Go plays over the scene. This flashback ends with his grandma opening his bedroom door and looking under the covers. Then we cut to 1991 where we see a dead black man on his bed. Like, why? Why did they edit the episode like this? This episode is almost incoherent. It's just a bunch of scenes slapped together. The last half of the episode depicts probably one of Jeff's worst crimes, wherein he takes home a 14-year-old Laotian kid named Konarak, synthesiphone, and drugs him with acid. Konarak is able to escape from his apartment naked, but is so delirious from the drugs that he is unable to speak. Glenda and 2 other black women see him and call the police. Jeff tells the police that Konarak is his 19-year-old boyfriend. The police, disgusted by gayness, take his word and instead of running a background check on Jeff or trying to learn the identity of Konarak, just leave. And Jeff later murders him. The episode would have made more sense had the entire episode been centered around this incident, showing that what happened to Konarak was almost exactly what happened to Tracy, the man who would ultimately put an end to his murder spree. The cutting back and forth between multiple different flashbacks that didn't have anything to do with each other was very stupid to me. The third episode is titled Doing a Dahmer, although it could have easily just been called Jeff Dahmer, the weirdo who doesn't fit in. He likes to dissect animals and touch himself while thinking about fish guts. Yeah, the show spends a lot of time, too much time, I would argue, showing us how aroused Jeff gets while thinking about dead stuff. After his mom and dad leave him alone in the house for about 3 months, Jeff develops a heavy drinking problem. He fantasizes about tackling a jogger, but decides not to. He picks up a hitchhiker who just wants to go to a concert, and Jeff takes this as an opportunity to get him to his house. And this is where Jeff commits his first murder. He gets pulled over by the police when they see that he's swerving but let him go because...
You got your whole life ahead of you. And I'm not gonna fuck that up by arresting you tonight.
He smashes his bones and then scatters the ashes across the yard. And the episode ends. Now, I understand this is based on a true story, but just because it's a true story doesn't mean you still don't have to put together a script that makes sense and has an objective. While the episode's editing isn't as jarring as the second episode, it still feels like a bunch of scenes slapped together. In episode 4, titled The Good Boy Box, we get a scene between Jeff, his dad, and his dad's new wife, Sherry, where Jeff tells them that he's weird. He's a weirdo. He doesn't fit in.
I'm not a normal guy. I don't fit in. I'm weird. I'm different from everybody else.
This episode isn't too bad in terms of storytelling, as it at least had a theme and an objective. The episode is meant to show us how much of a failure Jeff is. His constant run-ins with the law, him getting kicked out of college and the army, and his dad's well-intentioned efforts to help him. Emphasis on well-intentioned because it's clear that his father was not willing to look directly at what was going on with Jeff, and that it wasn't just his mom who had failed him in some way. It's one of the only episodes that was mildly effective. This episode isn't free from stupid editing and unnecessary scenes, though, because the episode shows the aftermath of that scene with his grandma from episode 2. And this scene happens.
Where is my fucking mannequin? I told you not to go in there! That is my room! That is my stuff! Don't fucking tell me where it is!
Why is this scene happening right now? This show is full of irrelevant and unnecessary scenes. I do not understand why the show spent so much time on the mannequin thing to begin with. And this scene, which was supposed to show how unhinged Jeff is, I guess, ends up being one of the most laughable scenes in the whole show. That's not to shit on Evan Peters' acting or anything. The scene is just fucking dumb. But bad editing and dumb over-the-top scenes are not the show's only problem. Another aspect of the show that I personally found annoying was the weird on-the-nose lines uttered by some of the black people in the show. Remember that scene I referenced earlier in the first episode where Tracy says,
You kill my you dirty motherfucker.
That line just didn't make sense to me because Tracy didn't even know anything about Jeffrey other than the fact that he had just tried to kill him, so why would he say that? There's a scene where the black detective calls out Jeff and implies that he deliberately moved into a black community because he knew the police would turn a blind eye to any weird behavior going on there.
You purposefully moved into an apartment
in the black community.
And in the 6th episode, Silence, one of its stronger episodes, Tony Hughes, who was the deaf and mute victim of Jeff, has a conversation with his mom at the dining table. It starts off with his mom commenting on his job at a condom factory, and then it slides into a conversation about the AIDS epidemic and how she didn't like how their pastor was saying that AIDS was punishment for gay people. Whether or not this conversation actually took place, it just was weird to go from condom factory to AIDS. It just didn't flow with the rest of the conversation and felt like the writers just threw that in there so we could be reminded that an epidemic was going on at this time, as if we didn't know that. Now, this is to be expected from a Ryan Murphy joint. He's not subtle when he has a message that he's trying to get across. Have you seen Feud? Have you seen American Crime Story Impeachment? He's a tell, don't show kind of guy. And I don't mean to say that as a way to imply that you have to always be subtle when you're trying to get an important message across. Sometimes you do have to be overt. Otherwise, you may risk having people misinterpreting your work, and that can be frustrating. However, with the Jeffrey Dahmer story, I don't think you need to be overt. You can just tell the story as it is without having to dial things up to 100. What I mean by that is there are moments in the show where true events are exaggerated in order to show how horrible they were. For example, the real-life cops Dumb and Dumber, John Balsarac and Joseph Gabrish, were the ones who handed Conorak back to Jeff, which ultimately led to his death. In real life, the two were fired but reinstated in 1994 and received $55,000 in back pay. In the show, an entire scene is dedicated to showing both of these police officers being awarded Officers of the Year. This did not need to happen. I don't understand why they wrote this in. Showing us the cops' neglect in the case of Conorak was upsetting enough. Seeing them get their jobs back was infuriating enough. You didn't need to make up a story where they win an Officer of the Year award. Come on. There's also a lot of scenes suggesting that Jeff's father was the one who taught him how to dissect roadkill, when in reality it doesn't appear that his father ever did that. In the last episode of the show, after Jeff is killed in prison, the judge who ruled against his brain being studied by scientists talks about how he objects to the idea that we can never know why Jeff was the way he was. That there's a real danger in trying to find a definitive answer to his actions. I agree, but then why did we spend 9 episodes essentially trying to explain his behavior? Why show a bunch of made-up scenes of him and his dad dissecting animals to really drive home the point that he was destined to become a serial killer? Another problem I have with the show is that it wants to have its cake and eat it too. So, why does this show exist? That is the question for a lot of biopics and miniseries lately. Blonde, another recent controversial Netflix release that has also caused polarization amongst viewers, is honestly the epitome of exploitation. The movie doesn't need to exist, and it's kind of infuriating that it does. But this is typical for Netflix. Netflix seems to thrive on controversy. Remember 13 Reasons Why? We've probably forgotten all about it with the millions of YouTube videos ducking on it, but that show was also one of the most controversial shows to come to Netflix and is considered to be very harmful in the way it depicts mental illness and suicide. You think Netflix gave a fuck? Of course it didn't, because the show ended up releasing 3 more seasons anyway. My theory was that it was to drive up engagement. Look at the Cuties controversy. However you may feel about the movie, Netflix knew exactly what they were doing when they revealed that cover. No matter how bad, stupid, pointless, or harmful something may be, as long as it gains viewership, that's all Netflix cares about. However, with Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, it seems that Netflix was trying to bury the show. There was no premiere, no press, and the trailer for the show dropped very shortly before it was actually released on the streaming platform. Their attempts to bury the show obviously failed because the show became the most watched show on Netflix immediately, and at the time of recording is still #1 in TV shows. Critics and audiences hated the shit out of Blonde. It's an equal amount of hate and disdain with just a touch more hate from viewers. However, with Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, there seems to be more love coming from viewers where critics appear to have absolutely hated it. Probably because Blonde was a 3-hour slogfest and Dahmer, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story was at least entertaining on some level. And it had everyone's crush Evan Peters in it, so I'm sure that bumped up the percentage on that Rotten Tomatoes score a little bit. Whether or not viewers liked it though, you do have to ask, why does this exist? Well, you could say its existence helped demystify Jeffrey Dahmer and instead highlighted the absolutely abysmal ways the police system failed his victims. which I think is probably one of the only positive things to come out of this show. Despite the exploitation, I think the showrunners at least had some good intentions. It didn't shy away from calling out the police. It wasn't as distasteful as Blonde. My main problem is the fact that the show seems to treat this case as an isolated incident. In the last episode, Glenda is given the Citizens Merit Award, and she tells the chief that she will only accept the award if they promise to do better. It could just be me, but from my eyes, it felt like the show was trying to do the bad apples thing. While the way cops handled this case was egregious, it is by no means an isolated incident. Cops being negligent, incompetent, racist, and homophobic is not exactly something we've evolved from since 1991. But I don't expect a Ryan Murphy show to make some kind of radical stance against the police system, so what did I expect? I just get frustrated whenever some true crime show comes out and there's an element of police incompetence to the story, and everyone treats it like we've never heard of police incompetence before, or we treat it as if it's only happened in a handful of cases when in reality it happens all the damn time. As I mentioned a few times before, the show embellishes and sometimes outright makes up shit to make the story seem more interesting when, like I already said, it didn't need to do that. Glenda Cleveland, played by the amazing Niecy Nash, is one of the more strange examples. Glenda Cleveland was a real person, but she was not his next-door neighbor. She didn't even live in the same building as him and did not interact with him at all. In the show, she's portrayed as kind of a mixture of the real Glenda Cleveland and Jeff's actual neighbor, Pamela Bass. The show basically erases Pamela's entire existence, and it's so fucking weird. The show makes it seem like Glenda Cleveland was the only person who was aware of what was going on with Jeff and was essentially haunted by the smells and noises coming from Jeff's apartment, in a horror movie kind of way. There's a scene in episode 7 where Glenda meets a new neighbor named Dean Vaughn. Jeff meets him soon after in the hallway, and Glenda overhears them talking. Jeff invites him to come over, and then Glenda later hears Jeff murdering him. In real life, Dean did live on the same block as Jeff and was seen talking to him at one point, but he was found dead in his own apartment, and it's unclear whether or not Jeff had anything to do with it. Jeff denied ever having anything to do with his death, and his death has remained unsolved to this day. The whole episode is meant to show how Glenda's complaints were constantly ignored by the police and how it led to multiple people dying. In real life, that does appear to be mostly true, but to portray the murder of Dean Vaughn at the hands of Jeff as fact is very irresponsible to me. Another huge problem I had with this show was the way it portrayed Jeff. This whole show felt like another season of American Horror Story. It focuses so much on how weird Jeff is and dwells on his weird behavior. Like, why do I need to see an entire sequence of Jeff stealing a mannequin and then caressing it? It's true that Jeff had a mannequin, but I don't understand why we needed to see all of that. Why do I need to see him touching himself while thinking about fish guts? Why do I need to see him lie naked on top of another man's naked, dead body? Why do I need to see him drinking human blood? Why do I need to see a whole scene of him drugging his roommate in the army and then caressing his unconscious body? We've already established that he was obsessed with men and drugging and murdering them. Like, we get it. Again, this is a show about a real-life sex offender, murderer, and cannibal. You don't need to beat us over the head with how much of a creep he was. Another bothersome moment in the show is in episode 6. The entire episode is dedicated to showing the life of Tony Hughes. We learn that he lost his hearing due to antibiotics he was put on as a baby. During the first half of the episode, we meet his family and his friends. We see him struggle to get a job because people aren't too keen on hiring deaf people, so he ends up getting a job as a model. We also see that Tony was an openly gay man who frequented gay clubs and bars. Tony meets Jeff at a club and the two hit it off. Jeff seems to really like him and constantly contemplates drugging him, but never does. Their romance is obviously brought to a very sad and tragic end when after having sex, Tony wants to leave and Jeff doesn't want him to. In real life, Jeff says he didn't know Tony before the night he killed him, but sources who knew Tony say the two were friends for at least a year and that they saw Tony and Jeff hanging out. So I guess we'll never know what happened exactly, but it's really weird that the show would depict their relationship as some kind of sick, twisted love story. This is what I mean when I say the show wants to have its cake and eat it too. The showrunners were clearly fascinated by Jeffrey Dahmer and wanted to portray how much of a weirdo he was in an American Horror Story kind of way, and did not care about the ethics of that. Because this isn't American Horror Story. I mean, it's definitely an American Horror Story, but it's still a true story. When I saw people on TikTok reenacting scenes from the show, which are, actual fucking events that took place in real life, I was deeply disturbed. Jeff Dahmer is a meme now, apparently. These are the risks you run into when you try to tell a true story and produce it as entertainment. I can totally understand why the family members of the victims hate this show. If I saw myself portrayed in a TV show mirroring my exact movements and words in what was probably one of the worst moments in my life, I'd probably be upset too. I don't personally think that the subjects always need to be involved in a show or a movie. When subjects are too involved in a project that's about them, facts tend to get watered down or altered in order to appease the subject. Just look at Bohemian Rhapsody. But when it comes to a show like this, there is the problem of re-traumatizing the victims. In an article for Prindle Institute, Catherine Hennessy talks about what they call the ethics of reproducing trauma in celebrity biopics. The new Hulu series, Pam and Tommy, complicates this question even further as Pamela Anderson not only refused to give consent to the show, but has also spoken out about the trauma she endured. The release of the tape over 2 decades ago forever scarred her life as Anderson faced all manner of slut-shaming, misogyny, and invasions of privacy. Of course, as her career plummeted, her abusive partner in the tape only gained more status to his rock and roll image. All of this was mostly forgotten by younger generations who might have never even known the names otherwise. But Hulu's series dredges up the sordid details and presents them anew. While showrunners claim to be defending Anderson in a way that she was not in the early 2000s, the series still does harm by simply revisiting all of this past trauma and bringing it to the forefront of headlines and social media. The reactions of Anderson and Lee make it clear who still benefits from this production. While Tommy Lee has praised the actor portraying him, Anderson posted to Instagram about refusing to be victimized once again and continues to identify herself as a survivor. Anderson has also revealed that she will be able to make her own documentary that truly tells the tale from her perspective. Will shining a new light on the story justify its production? This to me perfectly sums up the problem with this show. You can have good intentions, but those intentions may not necessarily play out that way. Despite the polarization, however, I think one thing we can all agree on is that the title of the show is fucking stupid.